The following Dvar Torah is based upon an article from the book Recalling the Covenant by Rabbi Moshe Shammah. This week we begin reading Sefer Shemot. In Parashat Shemot, we read about the pivotal roles that women played in the salvation of Moshe and ultimately the redemption of Bnei Israel. First, there are the midwives. Based on the Midrash, many assume that the midwives were Israelite, but from a straightforward reading of the text, it is more likely that they were Egyptian. The Torah states, "And the king of Egypt said to the midwives of the Hebrews, 'When you are helping the women give birth, look upon the stone. If it is a son, kill him. If it is a daughter, let her live.' But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt told them, and they let the males live." We can only imagine the level of compassion these women had. At this time, the Hebrews were slaves. It would have been easier for the midwives to devalue the humanity of the Hebrews, as was the culture in Egypt at that time. And even more than that, it would have been simpler to do as commanded by their king and relieve themselves of any guilt by using the alibi, "I was just following orders." However, we are told that the midwives' defiance was a direct result of their fear of God, notwithstanding the cultural and political atmosphere. We are further impressed with the midwives' heroic acts as the Torah mentions God's praise of them. "And God did well by the midwives because the midwives feared God, and he made them houses." Through the actions of Shifra and Puah, Moshe was born. Next, we are introduced to the wife of a Levite we know as Yocheved, who gives birth to a baby boy. Fearing Paro's evil decree to drown the male babies in the Nile, she hides her son for 3 months. When she can no longer conceal her baby, Yocheved makes a waterproof basket and sets it in the reeds along the shore of the Nile River. One may minimize the heroic acts of Yocheved by stating that she is in fact the boy's mother, and therefore it is her natural instinct to protect her baby. However, since the Torah includes this instance, and Yocheved is the only Hebrew woman mentioned, we may infer the intention of the Torah is to highlight her extraordinary determination and faith in God under Paro's perilous rule. Yocheved does all she can, and when she can do no more, she relies upon God's intervention. After Yocheved puts her baby in the Nile, we are introduced to the baby's sister, Miriam. As the Pasuk says, "And his sister stood from afar to know what would be done to him." Miriam waits on the side with her watchful eye, and at the critical moment steps in and approaches the king's daughter. As soon as it is discovered that there is a Hebrew baby in the basket, Miriam says, "Do you want me to fetch for you a Hebrew nursemaid to nurse the baby for you?" Miriam uses carefully chosen words when speaking to Bat Paro that would lead to the desired outcome, that despite the king's evil decree, Paro's daughter would save Miriam's brother. The last heroine in this parasha is Bat Paro. Surrounded by her maids, she was under pressure to act as expected of a princess and follow her father's orders. A woman of compassion and conviction, she knowingly saved a Hebrew child, a slave child, condemned to death by the king. Bat Paro paid a Hebrew woman to nurse, sustain, and raise the baby. Putting ourselves in her predicament, we understand the inner conflict she must have experienced. Bat Paro's character and values are underscored as her compassion triumphed, and she took it upon herself to save this baby and later to adopt him as her own child. The Gemara in Pesachim explains that women are obligated to drink the 4 kosot of wine at the Pesach Seder, despite the fact that it is a time-bound mitzvah, because, as it says, for they were part of the miracle. Rashi further expounds upon this explanation and quotes Gemara Sotah as it is stated, "For the righteous women who lived in that generation were the Israelites delivered from Egypt." In conclusion, the 5 women discussed exemplify the divine value of compassion that changed the course of history of the Hebrew slaves from the verge of extinction to the redemption for the future Jewish nation. Shabbat Shalom.